5:30. I'm going to turn this light out so hopefully you guys can see a little better. But if you can see fine with the light on, we can leave the light on, whatever the board members want to do, because they're kind of the ones with limited light up here. Are y'all okay like this, or would you rather the overflow left? Okay. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming to the first of our two budget hearings for our 2015 budget. We will go through the entire presentation, and then at the end we'll give the board members an opportunity to ask questions, and then we'll see what kind of questions might need to be addressed to the audience. This is our standard budget hearing process. We use virtually the same process each year, where the schools meet with and department heads meet with. So we have held staffing meetings to determine what our staffing needs are for the upcoming year. Each principal will come in and meet with central office, and will collaboratively go through their needs based on whatever curriculum initiatives are being put forth, technology, all the variety of things that impact what goes on in our classrooms and our schools. By the time we get to that point after staffing, approximately 85% of the general fund budget is basically set, because that's the largest thing that we spend money on out of the general fund is on people. The principals and department heads submit budgets for non-payroll expenditures over the course of the summer, and federal programs are also completed during this time as the information becomes available to us from the state, which could mean we didn't get it till this week. The budget process is designed to develop a tool for us to use in allocating financial resources to best serve the needs of our students, and we encourage the concept of site-based management. Site-based management is the concept that the decisions for the use of financial resources are to be made by the system personnel responsible for accomplishing those desired results. So all of this is very familiar if you've come to many of our budget hearings. We'll discuss revenues first. Our revenues for 2015, we are budgeting $159 million in revenue. We are up, that's an increase of $1.6 million from the 2004 amended budget. The significant part of the increase is a budgeted increase in our ad valorem receipts. We're starting to see, and there's a slide that will show that to you later on in the presentation, a nice pickup in our ad valorem receipts. We also have budgeted an increase from foundation funding. As you know, that is based on what our enrollment is as to how much we receive from the foundation program from the state. Those increases were offset by some one-time funds that we received during 2014. The larger of those were the Jefferson County $1.6 million that we received back in late spring, early summer. That was the residual left of the 1% sales tax fund that they distributed out to the different school districts that participated in that allocation originally. And we also had some one-time money related to some Career Tech 21st Century grants that some of our schools had applied for. That was one-time money. So the net of that left us up $1.6 million for our budget. Here's our revenue by source, and you can see that our local revenue, which is the purple bar on the top, is now seeming to grow a bit, and that's a good thing. The state bar is the blue on the bottom. You can see that it is tracking back up. Federal programs is the red in the middle, and you can see that stays relatively consistent year to year. And we did have an other bar, and that other that we got back in 2010, 11, and 12 was the ARRA funds that were the federal funds that we received during the time when our funding had dropped off so dramatically. So that was one time, again, it's kind of one-time money that we we don't have access to anymore. And those numbers for 2014 are our amended budget revenue numbers. Looking at our state foundation program, we, as you can see, we did have an increase in our state foundation funding. I think the total increase was about $1.8 million. Again, that's based on our student enrollment. You will see on the far right, the revenue per pupil is $4,241.78 per pupil. While we are at our highest point over the span of years from 2008 to now, as far as total receipts, we're still lagging behind when you look at it, revenue per pupil. Because if we were to have continued to receive revenue at the higher rate back in 2008, that would have meant an additional $3.4 million for us. So we're still suffering from the decline in state revenue. It just somewhat gets a little bit masked when you look at the enrollment increases that we've had. So just looking at total dollars doesn't necessarily tell the story. Our ad valorem, as I said, we amended our budget, our 2014 budget, back earlier in the summer to reflect our ad valorem receipts. We were quite pleased to see that our ad valorem receipts really are even coming in stronger than what we had budgeted them to be, and are very pleased with the revenue growth that we're seeing there. As you see, we have budgeted, or our projection shows a 3.8% increase over the prior year in ad valorem. We weren't quite that bold to think that was going to continue, so we just budgeted a little bit less than that. We budgeted a 1.7% increase in our ad valorem for the coming up 15 year. But we're very pleased to see that and feel like it's a big help for our students. If you looked at the ad valorem and you turned it into a per pupil analysis like we did for this foundation program, in 2008 we were receiving an ad valorem about $5,100 per pupil. And even with the current very healthy number that we're showing for 2015, that only equates to $4,800 per pupil. So we still have a $300 per pupil less than what we had in 2008 before the recession and the economic decline began to affect what we do in our schools. But it is definitely a positive trend and one we're quite pleased to see coming. We're going to look at our expenditures. Our expenditures are $165 million. We have, these are recurring expenditures, so that excludes capital. We are offsetting in our numbers, and the numbers there do exclude capital, but we are offsetting an increase in PHIP, which is the state employee insurance plan, that's going to cost us about $1.4 million in 2015. We are offsetting that against and an increase in technology as we continue the rollout of our one-to-one initiative. We are offsetting those by reductions in capital, which capital are not in those numbers, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it here, and reduction in staffing primarily. In looking at the staffing reduction, compared to the 2014, we have reduced 48.4 positions overall. You can see that the largest amount of that decline was in our non-certified support personnel category, which would include reductions in custodian positions, aides, operation positions, various support type positions across the district. This is our budget summary. As you can see, the result of this, we have revenues in excess of expenditures of $6.9 million. You'll also notice, for those of you who are familiar with our presentation of our financial statements, we have moved our 24 mil ad valorem tax, which we had previously captured in special revenue. We have moved that over into the general fund. A couple of years ago, there were some changes in accounting guidelines and general accounting and governmental accounting guidelines that would allow us to do that. And in looking at our numbers and where we are right now, we thought this might be a good time to move those funds over into the general fund and out of the special revenue fund, so that you have a much clearer picture of what we have that's available for classroom support, and then what's included in special revenues, which would be primarily your federal programs, and then the debt service capital. And the fiduciary expendable trust are our booster club programs. So we have little control over the operational aspects of those. However, we do have fiduciary responsibility for those funds, and they're presented in our statement. So in the end, we are projecting to begin the year with $92.3 million in fund balance, and we are projecting to end 2015 with $85.3 million in fund balance. One of the things that we have the flexibility to do is if we find schools that are left with partial units, partial foundation units, after we have allocated their full units, we have the ability and flexibility to transfer those units to other schools. And this is just a required notice that I'm telling you we are proposing to transfer portions of some units to other schools. And sometimes it's hard to find a little portion of a teacher, so that makes sense. And that is all I have. And I'll be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Yes, you mentioned the offset from the recurring expenditures.
I'm going to turn the overhead on.
The recurring expenditures and the PHIP increase and all, and most of that was offset by reduction in staffing, and you highlighted operational, custodial, and a couple other areas. What is the actual, I mean, for example, if you offset some of that expenses, say the custodial people, you still have to pick up some of that cost with contract.
We do. We still run, and I dig for my numbers, but we still run a positive over the cost when they were employees versus when we contract. It's about $500,000 to $600,000.
Over how many positions?
Over. See, some of those we lost some of those last year, so I have to go back and figure out because it's been in 2 years that we've been moving that in. So while it's not you don't get the whole benefit of losing the position, you do pick up the expense of the outsourcing. But in a year like this, where you've had an increase in PHIP, that just further helps support that decision.
You mentioned again back to the staffing. What is I understand that everybody has different salary levels, that is, faculty members, relative to their degrees and a whole host of other things. But generally speaking, what's the average ballpark cost of a teacher?
I'll use a rough number of around, including benefits, of around $70,000 to $75,000 a teacher.
So if we take an additional unit that's not funded by the state, we're out $75,000 roughly, plus whatever increases in benefits and everything that's mandated by the state.
And where they are on the salary schedule, because it could go up if they're higher on that would be sort of a mid to lower range teacher.
Miss Auntie, can you explain the last slide again? I didn't
Which
understand.
one? The transfer units?
What was that, the .33?
When the state allocates teacher units and all their units to the schools, they really are, that's their mechanism for allocating dollars. We have a requirement to meet the state funded dollars, foundation dollars to those schools, not necessarily the exact number of teachers they say, or principals, principals you have to have one, so assistant principals. And so what happens is you sometimes wind up with a little portion of, because they do uneven increments, so they'll allocate you an extra .33, And sometimes we can fill it and offset it, and then sometimes what the state provides in staffing meets the needs of those schools. Because most of our elementary schools have very few local units. You know, you may have a couple that have no local units. They're all foundation funded. On average, the typical elementary school would have three locally funded units. Usually that's the math and art, and their math coach teachers. So would be those units, and that's all you really have. So your local units are really at the middle school and high school levels. So you don't see it happening there. That's why I transferred those on up the line to those feeder schools within those zones. It's very, and it doesn't seem like a big deal to have to share with you guys, but I have to share it as far as the budget hearings.
And one other thing, will you explain again, was the ad valorem tax that you moved from one category to another, and tell me again now
It's
why
24,
that was
it was
done?
the 24 meal tax,
Okay,
and it was originally classified there because of the guidance between general accepted accounting principles and governmental accounting principles standards said that we had the option to classify it in special revenue. And it's been there since its existence. We are always going out, looking at the general fund, and then having to pull that over into general fund to look at the total picture of what we have to work with. So we just decided for budget presentation purposes that it might make more sense just to go ahead and put it over in general fund so we can see it there all in one place. Also, there's been a change in the reporting standards for our official financial reporting to where we have to move it over, and it's classified in general fund.
When we've talked about our base operating funds in the past, kind of from a discretionary standpoint, from the standpoint of that's the deficit piece that we need to manage, it's now directly on the statement where it used to be, that piece used to be part of special revenue. I would say now, when we talk about base operating fund, we're talking about general and debt service, based on really the nature of the other revenues that go into that.
It really gives you a better picture, because now when you look at the general fund, you see that, you know, clearly on their receipts and expenditures, they had revenue over their expenditures of almost $1.9 million in that general fund, whereas before you wouldn't have been able to tell that as readily with the way we classify the 24 mil fund. So that's a presentation plus there as well. And then you can see in the special revenue column, the federal programs operating the way you would expect them to, where the revenue and expenditures pretty much net out, and you have marginal differences there.
is it gonna stay in the general category though, or you'll move it back?
We were kind of testing the waters with the budget to see how it was accepted and what you guys thought about it, and then we might change it for presentation for our monthlies as well.
It's in general in our audited statements, so that's another aspect of this. It links more visually to our audited statements, and this the way it's combined here.
And then one more question, the trust, tell me again.
Booster club, booster programs, PTOs and booster programs.
So does that mean that we've got over 3 million?
Booster clubs, across all the districts, all the schools.
Is that
And
good,
PTOs.
Bad, different?
That's what
I mean,
it
is
is.
there-
It's
okay.
consistent.
It is,
We're kind of just an agent for those funds,
Okay.
basically. Those are driven by for example, the bylaws of a booster club or
Your PTO.
How long has, because I thought in the past, everybody kind of did their own thing. How long has it been on your books, Sandy?
We started a big push probably around 2007.
Okay.
The State Department really came down and wanted them to be on your books and put additional requirements. And to my knowledge, we only have one PTA that is not included in our books. So all the rest of the PTOs and booster clubs are all included in our books.
And what's the only PTA?
Greystone,
Okay.
it's the only school with PTA. So that's why when you spread it out over all those groups and all our great parents that work so hard for our schools, you can see how that money would be a nice benefit to our schools.
Back to the PHIP increase, you also mentioned technology. What is the expected increase as we move to the one-to-one technology initiative in 2015. What's the additional expenses there? And I've got a follow-on question, so look to Dr. Dodson, I'm going to ask him.
Yeah, Dr. Dodson's going to answer this one too.
Yeah, the main group that we still have to fill right now is grades 3-5 in terms of the Chromebook implementation. So that purchase was delayed until we get into the next fiscal year to help carry those costs over the 2 years better. So that's the big chunk that we have left. Middle school is up and running now. High school is in the process of transitioning from iPads to Chromebooks. That'll be phased in, but we've got the devices in place. 3-5 is where we still need to make that next change.
Well, I understand part of the big initiative, or part of the big process for putting in one technology is that it's a learning and teaching multiplier. And as such, in theory, somewhere down the road, you probably don't need as many instructional units because you probably don't need as many kids in the classroom at some grade levels. Can you talk just a little bit about the benefits of technology in that regard?
We saw one of the benefits this year for the first time that we've been looking for, and that was obviously the first thing most people think of is textbooks on these devices, and the publishing side of that equation has not caught up to the real technology side yet. But we saw this year, in this year's social studies adoption, the first opportunities to see some of those savings. Not in all the subjects or all the grade levels, but we ended up with a package at middle school that are actually 5th grade through 8th grade that our teachers are very excited about. It's a very exciting, engaging, it's a program put together by the Discovery Channel that is web-based, and it's called a tech book instead of a textbook. All online. That's gone very, very well. High school social study books for the regular level courses, we were able to purchase those for, I think, about 60% of the cost of a paper book. That was a little more problematic in terms of implementation, but definitely worth the transition there. So we were able to roll out typically a major, when we're in a textbook adoption cycle for one of the big 4, English, Math, Science, Social Studies. In the past, that's typically been about a $1.2 million package altogether, and I think we came in right around $750 this year. So we saved almost $500,000 right there. In terms of, that's the first time I've really seen the content in technology really being able to see that savings. So hope there's more of that to come. We got science coming up this next year, so we'll really be looking at applying the lessons that we learned here in that regard. We're also seeing more blended learning opportunities at the high school, kids that are taking classes that are taught by our teachers, but they only meet face-to-face periodically, and students have an opportunity to have adaptive schedules, be able to do to work during the day if they need to, and we're only seeing that pick up more and more. So that's going to provide some flexibility as our high schools get bigger, give us a little more flexibility in terms of moving kids on and off the campus at different times, I hope.
And I guess in terms of electives, you know, with the crazy job market that it is, and there's not that many jobs to begin with, when you guys started the academies, there was always a concern about would you have enough interest to justify a teacher unit to support the offering. And I guess with technology, you'll be able to expand the offerings to pair up with either job availability or job trends, as well as even distance learning or and dual enrollment with things like places like Jeff State and all. And at the same time, not have to afford a teacher unit necessarily just because it's a unique one-off kind of thing.
We're starting to see that now. We're closing for this current year the old business management programs at both high schools. That was one of the oldest career programs, but the interest is just not there anymore. And so those units have phased out. The Finance Academy, the IT Academy have grown in place of that outdated model and is better matched to the job market today here in the Birmingham area especially. So you're starting to see programs like health science. Health science has exploded, and that is the biggest job feeder in this region. And so our kids, it's not just medical school preparation, nursing and everything else. So those programs have exploded in terms of teachers, and some of our more traditional career courses are beginning to dwindle a little bit. That's kind of good to see the programs realigning more with the economic picture of our region. So hope to see even more of that to come.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Angie, the ADM is going to be calculated a little bit different this year by the state. Is it not done right after school starts, and that's going to be done at a later time, maybe from,
The official window is 20 days after Labor Day. It didn't change to my knowledge, but it essentially becomes an average enrollment for that 20-day period. But it starts Tuesday.
so it's going to stay that short window? I thought I read that it was going to change and go to another, no?
I haven't
Okay.
noticed it, but that's kind of stretching out with them.
The only reason I would ask is obviously it could change the funding based on what they actually calculated.
Well, that would be for 16,
They went to the
yeah, because we're a year behind.
They went to the 20 days after Labor Day a few years ago, maybe. It used to be the first 40 days. I think it used to be the first 40 days.
Yeah.
Anyway, but then they went to the 20-day after Labor Day window.
You answered it, you think it's 16, so it's not just.
If it were to
Going in
change,
arrears.
yes, what we earned this year would fund 16, not 15, so.
Debt service.
Uh-huh.
Seeing, taking a huge, what if everything stays the same, can we assume that our debt service will be retired in 2016?
Our debt service, the fund,
Yes.
fund balance?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we certainly hope not. We hope that we'll have to see how it pans out, but, we would look at where we could shift dollars if we were, depending on where our ad valorem receipts were, that could certainly be used to fund into debt service. There's some other places we can look at, but that's always something we want to keep an eye on.
And that's essentially what's the money that's there is local money. So it's the nature of the money that's there is pretty much fungible with the nature of the dollars that are in the general fund. That's why when we talk about base operating funds, it's now with this presentation, it essentially becomes those two funds together. The remaining funds are in the special revenue, or for the most part, purpose-driven type revenues.
1.5 million in capital outlay.
That is basically where you're going to spend this year, primarily focused on various life cycle type replacements. We've got a lot of asphalt work that we need to plan over the course of the year. There is potentially some roof work. We did a lot of mechanical work this summer that we completed. I replaced several chillers. We installed a lot of the variable speed pumps, as you recall. But that's basically an amount we will design and plan for things like various resurfacing. We want to take some of the carpeting out of some of our classrooms, replace with the VCT tile, various and sundry things like that is what that amount represents.
Any other questions from the board? I do want to, and I was remiss for not doing this to begin with, we do want to welcome John Lyda here from our city council that's at our hearing with us today. Thank you for being here, John. We'll entertain questions from the audience or comments. We also have a form at the front table that if you would like to submit a question or comment, you're free to pick up that form and submit that, and you can return it to us at any time. And we just request that you do it within a 10-day period. So that's available.
I had a couple questions. Looking at the local teacher units and looking at the breakdowns that are provided in here, can you give us an idea of how those local teacher units, what goes into that decision-making process? I mean, I know it's probably principals, but they've got to come to y'all to,
I'll turn that, since that's really a curriculum-based question. And there again, those are concentrated within our middle schools and high schools. So Dr. Dodson.
It has to do with all the expanded offerings that we have in terms of electives, foreign language, and those things that go beyond what the state will provide. So those do tend to concentrate where the kids have more choice in their curriculum. And obviously, as the curriculum gets more expansive and complicated, the numbers go up. So that's why it's different.
okay, but it's just sort of made on an individual, like, do the principals come to y'all and say?
It's
or is that-
it's going to be curriculum-based. It's
Yeah.
based on the program offerings along with the number of students that they have enrolled at the school.
They're not asking for local teachers.
No, they don't
Every
come in
year,
and ask for a local teacher.
we look at enrollment, we look at course selection, what the students are, just like we're closing the business programs this year. We close things where the kids vote with their feet in terms of where their interests are, where parents are guiding kids in terms of their choices. And so things that don't work out, we let them go, and we add new things that are growing and promising toward our mission. But that's a process every year that we sit down with every principal and look at where we are, where we're going to be, how the staff matches up to those needs.
And part of that comes into play is to look at the class size and what we want our class sizes to be at those grade levels.
Yeah.
So that makes a difference as well when we look at that. But typically when the principals come in to talk about staffing, they have already surveyed their students and have some idea of what their interests are for the upcoming year. So then that helps the curriculum folks to make a wise decision about what would be a good model to operate in that school based on what the desires of the kids are. Because we certainly don't want to have a teacher in a classroom that we can't make a class. So those are all discussions that are happening.
Can I do a follow-up, Dan? Dan?
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. The operating expenditures, we used to talk about keeping 1 month, I understand the shift and the change in the reporting. But so what is 1 month operating expenses for us now?
Well, I did. It was about 11.4 million.
Okay, so that gives us about 5 months of.
6 months.
Okay. And then last question. I've got two. I'm trying to pick which one's more important, so I'll go with this one. I actually have 6, but okay. The capital plan. I've noticed in looking, I've been going to lots of other people's board meetings, and they typically bring the capital plan to the board to vote on somewhere around the budget. And this year, it's a little bit more, people are a little bit more interested in the capital plan perhaps than they have been in years past due to some of this rezoning stuff that's going on. And do you have, it's one thing to say, well, that 1.5 million is for various and sundry things, but will there be a plan that will be
Yeah,
attached to
it's
this?
required to be submitted by the 15th, and it'll be submitted by the 15th to the State Department, possibly to the board with the September 8th meeting.
Thank you.
With the expenditures not meeting the revenue, and we're also, going a little bit of deficit there, is there a plan of what happens when that money goes dry? So we're not having enough revenue meeting our expenditures, so what happens then?
The plan has been to shrink that over time. We have really by industry standards, Alabama education standards, a very large cash discretionary reserve balance. The plan is to shrink that over time. We've made good progress over the years. It's very helpful this year that our property tax base seems to have worked its way out of where it's been the last 4 years. But the plan is to continue to shrink that and manage that. It's getting into an area where our revenue generation capacity comes into play. One of the catalysts for our large cash reserves was when Jefferson County assessed a tax and essentially provided us money in lump sum funded by a 20-year tax. That's the county 1 cent sales tax. We received that money, I think, in 2007, I think the tax, if I remember correctly, started in 2005. Our general plan has kind of been to spread the impact of that over the life of the tax. So from that standpoint, we're somewhat in a natural spin down position because again, we received in theory 20 years worth of tax collections in lump sum up front. So we're kind of managing our way through that. We intend to continue to decrease that base operating fund deficit.
And that's really where in a public school district, we have different revenue recognition rules than you would in a private industry. Whereas if we were a private industry, we probably would not have recognized all of that revenue in the year we received it. We would have spread it out over the life of when it was to be earned. We don't have the same revenue recognition rules in the school district. We have to recognize it all in lump sum when it comes in. So the only way to use those funds is to go negative.
Is there like a 5-10 year outlook of when that money would have to meet expenditures revenue?
We will always keep a 1-month operating reserve. We're required by law to do that, and we will always do that. We'll continue to look at our revenue streams. The really surprising pickup that we've seen in our ad valorem is very positive to us, and you'll see we didn't say, oh, we've got an increase in ad valorem so we can spend more money on other things. We didn't choose to do that. And we'll continue to monitor that, watch that, and continue to be very tight on our expenditures so that we can keep us far away from that ever being a question.
Well, another piece of that too as well is that penny, that's an education penny, that county assessed penny. At least in terms of the way that was structured originally, there's an expiration of that. The greater the collections over the course, the excess goes against the debt, so the debt would conceivably be paid off early. So we think the last estimate I had from the county folks was that could be in the 2020, 2021, or 22 range. It's something we will continue to monitor as terms of is that penny likely to stay in education, or is it not, or some portion of it is something that is certainly part of that plan in terms of will that taxing capacity stay in education.
I was going to ask Mr. Craig now, do they stop collecting that at some point?
The agreement, and it's been a while since I've reviewed that, but basically the way it was drawn is the tax goes away when the debt's paid off, and 100% of the collections from the tax were not pledged to the debt service, so there was a natural overage annual excess. So that excess by design pays the debt off early. So if there is excess, and if those continue, if the 1 cent tax base continued to grow, it would accelerate the pay down and make it earlier. Some of the original estimates of when that might pay down before we got into the kind of economics situation we got into were 12 to 15 years. I think it was started in 2005 and it's been 9 now, so the potential is there for it to pay down early. It just really depends on the performance of the county tax collections.
So we're talking about 2020 or maybe before?
That's really not my speculation to provide, but the last estimate I got from the county was around 2022.
Okay. And I would just add one more question. What is in K-5, what's about the average class size right now, Mr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson?
It's different in grade levels. The younger ones, we try to, around 19 or so in the youngest levels, and you'll typically see around 22 to 23
right.
In the older grades in elementary.
Do you consider that ideal?
Ideal is tough. That's a tough one to reach.
Well, I'm a teacher, so
Absolutely.
you know my bias on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the best we can do with what we have, I believe. And
Right.
that's, we certainly try to equip the teacher with all the tools and the things that they need to make the best.
But I would assume if you had a sizable increase in revenue from some source, that you might be able to decrease that class size.
Yeah, there's some question as to whether that's something that's been studied a lot over the last 10 years, is do investments in class size actually lead to increases in achievement? That's a tough one to prove.
Right.
To get to the levels where you actually see those changes, you almost have to get to the levels that you only see in private school.
Right, 15 or so.
environments.
Right. Well, I know I've taught classes of 15 and 22 and 35 and 44.
I did too.
And if you've been around a while, you know you've taught them all. And at 15, you get around 20, you can cover around 20. There's a lot you can do that you can't do with the larger sizes. But I was going to ask one more question. How much pre-K do we have in the Hoover schools?
Not sure what the numbers are now.
We have a preschool program. I haven't looked at the numbers this year. It usually runs around 60 students. If
Yeah.
my recollection's correct, and you're catching me cold on that one.
Do we have pre-K offered to every family in Hoover?
No.
Yeah.
No, it's a program that's provided for
There's-
students with significant needs, but we do have
We have a tuition.
we have
base.
peers who are enrolled with them to work with them, but it is a limited program because of the obvious the money involved in it. We get very, very little from the state.
Would you agree ideal is to have pre-K?
Oh,
And-
absolutely, absolutely. The need is
Right.
great.
Again, an additional revenue source might make that expansion possible.
Right.
Thank you.
I may have a three-part on this. With a month to go, what's our projected deficit spent for this fiscal year?
I would have to go back and look at the number I used. I'd have to back into it for the number for you, and I just don't remember that off the top of my head. I was focused on
Nothing
the budget.
close to,
I would be afraid to make a guess at this point
Could
because
be
it's
kind
maybe
of-
in the room.
so as of today, we don't know how this 7 million deficit projected for 2015.
Well, we changed our
compares
budget to
this year.
9.9 million. We think we'll come in right around there, slightly less. So this would be slightly better than
So
that,
it's
what
an
we
improvement
expect to
from
meet
this
this
year.
year. That's what we would expect, yes.
The next part is kind of combined because I think you have two different dynamics that are going to go on. Based on the rezoning that I hear and that I read about, the addition possibly of an elementary school, maybe or maybe not, with a high school or Old Berry being converted and such. It's going to take capital expenditures for that, and with the Fed looking at dropping back on quantitative easing, we can anticipate that interest rates are going to go up by the time that the city of Hoover has a chance to venture in that. So with all of that in there and looking towards reallocation of students among different facilities and buildings, are we looking at putting the algorithms into the program that we're going to be able to understand the financial impact those are going to have, whether it's pro or con? I.e., if students are being moved to a different school that is further away, will that increase bus level participation? Will that decrease that? Will that add to where you can no longer have double routes? And you're going to have to add drivers, and you're going to have to add buses, and you're going to have to add fuel consumption. That's just one. I realize transportation is a small part. But the same thing with the schools and the FTEs and the teaching units. Is there going to be a way to capitalize
Well, it's the same
on
number of
that?
students, so you generally expect you to work out to roughly the same number of FTEs. And you also have to offset that around the timing of when you need to add additional class space, because our goal is to maximize the buildings and efficiently use the buildings that we currently have.
Right, is there a way to efficiently use the teaching units as well to
Yes,
see
we
a
would transfer
reduction
teaching
where
units.
2016 can come, if not to even, to be 2 or 3 million over plan or over revenues as opposed to this? Because if we work this down by 2 million a year, 1 or 2 million a year, It's not gonna take long to get to that 11, 12,000, I mean, that 11 or
That
12
would be,
million.
that would be our hope, and one way to do that is to stay out of the capital market, not building things. Thank you. Ms. Frazier, do you have anything else?
I do not.
Now, I had one more question about, I noticed on looking at the detailed reports about, I noticed our fleet renewal money went down again this year because our buses are aging. And I know that that was part of the discussion about buses and bus fees. And, I'm wondering, does this budget reflect anything about changing, y'all talked about getting new technology for the buses, and is that reflected anywhere in this
No.
budget?
No. Well, our regular board meeting is scheduled for September the 8th. It will be at 5:30 at Hoover High School Theater. We will precede that with, actually the budget hearing, I'm assuming, Ms. Frazier, will begin at 5:30, and then the board meeting will commence at the completion of the budget hearing. So, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.